Digital technology has made it possible to elevate the lives of everyone, even those living in the most remote areas. It is quickly changing the way we live, and many social enterprises in the Philippines are relying on digital technology, different forms, to grow their businesses and to promote their respective causes. My name is Cheska Calao, and in today's roundtable discussion, we will be talking about how many social entrepreneurs are relying on technology to grow even the smallest of businesses and to raise awareness for even the most unfamiliar causes. Thank you for joining me here today. You know what, we have a great discussion that's about to happen because I know a lot of, well, everyone here is after social good. Everyone here is, putting in work to make the country better for everyone. So, let's start with defining change maker. What is a change maker?
For me, a change maker is someone who desires change and uses their knowledge and resources to make it happen. So it starts with a passion for people and identifying a problem and giving yourself permission to solve it.
Anyone else?
It's hard to follow, yeah. Like a textbook. I mean, exactly like, yeah. But in our context, yeah, definitely. Change maker, obviously you see something that's not right in the world, and then you say, the world could be a little bit better. So that's like a specific problem you want to solve, and sort of like, and then you apply your energy, your thinking, and then you gather and work with a lot of people in order to address this problem. And so that's pretty much what you said as well.
I think what separates change makers from normal people is that they do action on what they think is not right. So it's easy for us to see what's wrong, but doing something about it is what makes change makers different.
So I agree with all the points. I think the one that I'd pick on again is really about getting the stakeholder buy-in. Because I think there's seeing the change you want to enact, and then there's getting enough buy-in from other stakeholders to make it happen. And so I think for me, change makers are able to kind of kickstart the movement for systemic change, which is really what this country needs.
Okay, so what do you think makes an idea or an organization a change maker or a social enterprise?
For an idea to become a social enterprise, it has to be beneficial to the people, the audience for the idea itself, the stakeholders, as you mentioned, and as well as it shouldn't be harmful for anybody else. It should think about what those people need most and do something about it.
I think that the element of value, value gets created in all products, right? You can buy a mug and that's creating value for you. I think the whole point is that you're not just creating value for the user, but you're creating value for society as a whole. And so it's a mix of like do no harm, but also do good at a higher level than just for the individual consumer or the individual client.
Yeah, so I agree with that. No, it addresses the need of a certain segment of the society. So it goes beyond individual needs or desires, but addresses a larger community. But sometimes it also makes it more relevant if you're personally connected to the issue. Then the passion is very natural for a change maker.
Well, for me, I hope that one day the lines between social enterprise and enterprise will truly blur. Because if I could have a wish list or a dream, is like all enterprises would have a social mission or purpose at their core. And again, it's not to discriminate, hey, you're a scrappy startup social enterprise, maybe like in our case, or like big corporation, because big corporations can enact huge change and create, and we've had these discussions even internally, is like if big corporations wanted to enact social change, they could do so at an impact that would be 100 times faster than what we would be able to do. Today, it would take us 10 years. And so hopefully these lines would blur. But going back to that definition, I think it goes back to the intentionality or the purpose of why you do it.
Yes.
And so you could be small, you could be big, but what is your purpose? And that purpose hopefully should be something that does good in society. And you could be making products, you could be a large tech company, you could be a restaurant conglomerate, and you could still be bound in terms of like a social purpose. So I think it goes back to that intentionality that a founder or like a CEO imbues into that organization. And I think it can be seen from small to big, from non-tech to tech.
Why should an organization or an entrepreneur consider building a social enterprise, even if, let's say, it's not as personal to them? I love how everyone's
I'll speak for the big corporation. No? I come from Accenture, and you can say that there's really no personal attachment, but our mission is to change the world, improve the way the world works and lives. And it's not just about feeling good about ourselves. I really think that corporations will do well if the community does well. So we enhance our image or reputation by doing good, but at the same time, you also contribute to building a fair, just, and prosperous society, which is good for business. So I think that is benefiting us indirectly as well. No? So I think it's all good, and of course, our clients also look for companies that care. And it's good that if you have these activities that blend well with the things that you do, so it's I think it's mutually beneficial.
So adding to that, since I'm also from Accenture, I feel that our company really embodies that principle that we want to improve everyone within our vicinity, and our clients, not only our clients, our people, but the people around us, because they're the ones that we also care about as people. So as an employee of Accenture, whenever I know that Accenture does its part for these social enterprises, I feel glad that my company does something for other people other than just purely business. So I think it's a good motivator for employees such as myself.
For us, certainly, when we think about our mission and our purpose, it again goes back to that intentionality. It's clear to us who our customer is or who we serve. And for us, it's that micro-entrepreneur, it's that Nana, it's the sari-sari store owner, and the communities they are around. And so that is primarily our reason for being. And then, but we also work with large organizations. To Henry's point earlier about bringing in stakeholders, we do, because to extend our impact, we have to blend both worlds in that sense. We work on the store side, the sari-sari store, building that community, but say bringing goods, services to impact them and to impact that community, then we have to work with the larger organizations as well. Some things we have to build on our own, obviously. And so it's that. And a lot of times you also work with a lot of ecosystem partners like microfinance institutions, like local suppliers, like technology partners, like even community members of sari-sari stores. And so I guess it's that mix and that convergence. But for us, it's just always clear at the end of the day when I work with and talk with a large corporation, we wear the hat of like our primary stakeholder, which is the nanay. And how could this engagement, how could this partnership benefit the nanay, but also benefit the corporation, and also benefit Happinoy? So the world is not a zero-sum game from our perspective. And then we feel that there is abundance. And we just have to figure out the different roles and what we can bring to the table. But the lens we'll always carry is really how can this impact the store owner, the micro-entrepreneur, and their communities.
And so I think, for us, what we find very interesting is, I think there's two ways of seeing, social good. There's social good because it's the right thing to do, and there's social good actually as a, competitive business advantage. And I think here, especially for a company like Accenture, you are constantly trying to win over customers, and you're constantly trying to win over talent. There's a war on talent going on in many countries, including in the Philippines. And so I think here, there's really three things you can achieve with social good. I think one is from a branding perspective. Consumers are increasingly values driven. And it's something we've seen with Gen Z, so we focus on Gen Z, right? We interact with about 10 million of them a year. And they're increasingly values driven. They kind of issue the whole endorsement type of advertising. And for them, they're always like, okay, like what is your company doing for the environment, for healthcare, for education. And so being values driven as a company just makes sense from a branding perspective to sell your services. But then people are not just consumers, they're employees, future or current. And from a hiring perspective, being values driven is a huge advantage. I mean, we now have a team of about 60 people at Education, and we have 30 openings for the next couple of months, and we know that being mission driven kind of gives us an edge over other companies that will pay way better or have way nicer, kind of like benefits, etc. And so it kind of gives you that edge. And then on the retention side, as you say, if someone feels like their company, like Accenture, is really doing their part to build a better Philippines, you're not going to move to a competitor for essentially like a similar job in a similar kind of working environment. And so your retention will be much higher. And so as a business, it just makes a lot of sense. And so I think there needs to be a ethics and integrity and social good case. But if you have a business case as well, then that's how you can convince many of the larger corporates to get involved.
But what I just want to quickly add, though, is that in this day and age, authenticity is so important. Yes. And I think people can see right through you. Yes. So during the environmental movement, people saw immediately through all the greenwashing corporations. So that I would just caution in that is, so people can smell it now, and you can't hide it in the age of social media. And so all the more, because you're running really big ships, that kind of authenticity needs to, and culture should come out in a very sincere way. I mean, of course, these are still large corporations, so I guess that becomes that challenge. But it's easy when you are like relatively smaller organizations, because each individual is so mission driven, and that's natural. But for large corporations, I think people can also sense, hey, this one is just sort of like for a branding perspective, and not
for sure.
Yeah, but I totally understand, and I agree with that point. But that authenticity from the leaders has to be there.
Yeah, so I totally agree with your points, no? Especially speaking for Accenture. It's good for us, it's good for attracting and retaining talent. It's good for our reputation, for as far as attracting clients as well. But at the end of the day, it makes a good business so we can sustain it. Right, because the sustainability is the aspect that you want to, you're only able to do good if you continue to have a business, right? So I think it's a cycle, and but it starts with a purpose, and being genuine about that purpose.
I love how everyone here is representing, a different aspect of social good. We have education, we have helping smaller businesses, we have, it's just, what are the other social goods that we need to focus on in the Philippines?
Agriculture.
Agriculture.
I also think healthcare is an area. Definitely education, because that's a foundation for solving poverty and a lot of the root causes of our issues. But I think, at least from my perspective, if we address things like education, healthcare, and enabling small, medium enterprises, then we can really uplift the country.
Yeah, well, agriculture, I mean, primarily because of our background, it's retail and distribution, but we've always believed that to fundamentally add value, you need a production component with micro-entrepreneurs or farmer groups or fishermen, and link them into an inclusive value chain or inclusive supply chains. And that will really create more prosperity and wealth, especially to rural areas. And so we're quite fortunate. We work a lot with microfinance institutions, and there's a ton of problems here. Last night, I was just with some of our board members, and this was a topic of discussion, actually, agriculture. For several reasons, addressing poverty, food security, climate change.
There can be more improvements made with governance as well. We have a lot of data that we collect, but we don't use them necessarily. So it's also difficult to find consistent research data. When we were doing research, it was difficult. And so we can also do something to help governments, local governments, and even the national government. There can be improvements made to that.
And again, glad that there are different representatives for different aspects of social good. Can you tell us exactly what your businesses are about, or what your organizations are about?
So Happinoy, we're a social enterprise. We focus on women micro entrepreneurs who run these hole-in-the-wall shops called Sari Sari stores, and we aspire to be the best partner for them in business and in life to help them grow. And the way we do it is really through training, microfinance, and business opportunities. And I know we're here in a tech panel, and so like one of the big business opportunities we're seeing now is really digitalization for our store owners.
Well, Accenture is a multinational services company. We offer digital technology, consulting, outsourcing services. We have a program, part of our corporate citizenship, and the theme has been for many years now called Tech for Good, because we really rely on technology and innovation and implement them for our clients. But we have decided to focus on, how can we harness the power of technology, especially these new and emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, blockchain, analytics, cloud. How do we harness all of that and apply them in doing good for the society? So I think that's why we're here. We speak for that, but it also doesn't take just a big company like ours. No, I think it's a social. It's really an ecosystem of players, because I've been in different forums talking about AI, the impact of AI, for example, because that's my personal area of focus. I think it requires the academe, the government, and the private sector working together in order to really see the benefits of applying these technologies. So it cannot be just one sector of the society.
So Education is a tech platform that wants to empower there's about 20 million Gen Z Filipinos, so age 13 to 23. And we want to help them make well-informed decisions for their education, for their career choices, and even in other life elements like financial literacy or personal health. We've been around for, I think, about 5 years now, and we're mostly digital, and so we reach about 10 million Filipinos every year digitally, and then about 200,000 through events. And for us, I think the challenge is how do you empower a self-aware youth in the Philippines so that you can get those Gen Zs onto better, more successful and happier lives.
Okay, so let's get into how technology is helping you guys run your companies.
Okay, I mean, there's a bunch of things now, honestly. Like internally, we definitely harness a lot and use a lot of technology, but increasingly also externally with our stakeholders, with our nanays and store owners. Like Henry, I have because digital platform first, and then that's why the reach is automatically scalable with technology. And honestly, our roots were really very on ground. So we started out very traditionally, and so we train on the ground, we link up with microfinance partners on the ground, we link up with partners, suppliers, etc. on the ground. And so that was a big chunk of how we operated for several years. And then we started sensing this whole, technology transformation these past few years. And so both internally and also with our Sari Sari store owner partners, nanays, then we also had to undergo that transformation. And so we're beginning to harness a lot of these tools we've been using internally, but now also we need to use these tools externally. So we do use a lot of, obviously for our ERP, we work with NetSuite. Obviously for our surveying, the good thing about technology now is that it's been democratized to a certain extent. Of course, you need to work with companies like Accenture and like NetSuite and these different groups to help us on, I guess, the more corporate enterprise side, even for a small organization. But there's a ton of software services that you could just subscribe to. E-commerce platforms, Slack for internal messaging, and all of these things that are extremely empowering, especially for small organizations. And so we use a lot of that internally, even for customer service now, ticketing, etc., all these things. Interfacing with the outside world, these social media platforms, chatbots, so etc. These things now. And of course, obviously now with our store owners, apps.
I think what's quite interesting is, and we were talking about before this roundtable, I think there's one, you can use technology to have much more efficient communication internally, I think for the way you interact with your customers. One of the great uses we're seeing is beyond just being a website and being mobile ready, we're actually going to be pushing into kind of customized student-centric advice. So as opposed to saying like, oh, here's what you can understand about careers in the BPO space, it can actually be like with a chatbot asking you, okay, are you interested, and if so, why? And let's kind of talk through all your options. So I think that's kind of like the next level for us. But for all this too, we're getting what's super important is going to be infrastructure. So give us a fast, reliable, and cheap internet, and we'll be able to do great things. And we'll be able to do great things for this country.
Just echoing, yes. Yes, we work in a lot of rural areas. Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about what you guys do exactly, but we haven't exactly touched on why you guys do it.
The story of Education is actually a slightly long one in the sense that I wouldn't say I'm your typical kind of like edtech founder. So I think very often you'll find people who, like took up postgrad in education, or one of their parents was a teacher. And so there was this kind of like burning passion for education from a very young age. I think, when I looked to move back to the Philippines 5 years ago, I had a kind of like my business school hat on, which was, I want to solve problems in the Philippines, but I can only pick one.
Okay.
And I want to do
Yes.
something I want to solve a problem in a scalable and sustainable way. So I actually came in very agnostic. I looked at healthcare, I looked at agriculture, I looked at real estate, at arts, I looked at governance, I looked at education. And then what struck me was just how many problems could be at least not fully solved, but partially solved through better education. And I kept seeing the education theme come up over and over again. And I then looked at the education space, and what I found fascinating was you didn't have to recreate supply or demand. So you ask any Filipino, it doesn't matter if they're living in a fancy, subdivision of Makati or in the most remote area of the Philippines, like they all want their kids and their grandkids to get an education. And I think so from that perspective, it's great. There's no convincing, quote unquote, needed. We don't have any kind of gender issues where like girls have to stay at home. It's from a demand side, I knew that as long as we could help find the right education for students, there would always be demand for it. And then on the supply side, what I found fascinating was there's just the sheer amount of education options in the Philippines alone. And I think, I came in thinking there might be 200 universities. There's 6,000 higher ed institutions in this country. There's thousands of public and private ones. There's 10,000 senior high schools. So supply is not an issue.
Yes.
And so when you have unlimited demand and almost an oversupply, then it's possible to come in and, using technology, kind of like, fixing the mismatch. And so it kind of came more from a agnostic, education seems like a very interesting place to have positive impact in the Philippines. I think on a more personal level, I've benefited from, I was very lucky in terms of my education, and I kind of grew up in a family where both my parents were scholars, my sister was a scholar, I got a scholarship for my postgrad. And so I kind of saw the value of making sure that, not just helping people find the right education, but being able to afford it as well, which is a big issue in the Philippines. And so that's kind of where my personal story tied in with my outside-in analysis.
We created an application for Accenture, and it started with me listening to my sisters recount her experiences through the Doctors to the Barrio programs. For her, seeing child malnutrition in her municipality, and how the barangay nutrition scholars would go from house to house and take down all the details, which was very manual, and even the forms themselves may have gotten misplaced, or it takes really a long time. And seeing her burden for her municipality sparked the idea for me to help create an application that would better the process, and in effect would help the children become healthier. So that's what we wanted to do for our project.
My dad is a civil engineer, and my mom was a bank executive her entire life, and she stayed with one corporation. And then my dad, as a structural engineer, if you know how they think, they have to engineer and design buildings such that they cannot fail. So they're, I guess, extremely successful but risk averse. And so that sort of like defined my life. And so I went into a good school, took a course that basically said land a good corporate job. I actually spent the first part of post-college in an FMCG with a multinational. I worked in Unilever, and this was the transition then to what I do now. In the last couple of years of my stay there, I was working on a number of things. And so I was working on channel strategy, which essentially meant how can we bring our products to everywhere around the country. And so that started exposing me to Sari Sari stores. And so I went around and said, wow, there's huge numbers. And then when we would go around, one of the things I personally saw was like, there's so much of them. How come not a lot of them are growing? So that became sort of like a problem statement. And then the other thing that I was handling at that time was a group called Retail Solutions. So I guess this would be like the internal consultants to our large top customers, our key accounts. And so I was like wondering, on one side, you've got all of these Sari Sari stores that could be helped and could be helped to grow. But at the same time, I was thinking, I was handling a group that was in essence supposed to serve our top customers. So how could we give what we give our top customers and sort of like democratize this and give this to store owners? And that sort of like started the path. And so I was quite fortunate. I have great co-founders. Before he went to politics, Bam Aquino, we co-founded together, but also with microfinance institution, Dr. Alip Card, MRI, which is the largest microfinance institution in the country. And my former boss in Unilever, Manny De Luna and Rappen, all these great people. And we started Happy Noi. And then we identified what the major things that we could help out in, and we saw capital was critical. Nobody articulated train us, but we saw that the education piece was quite important to help improve certain practices. It's not rocket science, but just a few tweaks here and there could spell performance and also business linkages. So these are the foundations of Happy Noi, and till today, this is what we do. But now, obviously now, priming it in a digital environment. But what I would say though in that journey is that it's quite humbling, especially that transition from a big corporation to being in a scrappy social enterprise. It's because in a big corporation, you call somebody who will call somebody who will call somebody, and you show up and it's done. And when you're starting out, you have to do everything. That's one. And the second thing that is quite humbling is that in a big corporation, you create a memo and a circular and it gets implemented. But that doesn't work. And quite honestly, it was humbling when you were starting to work with our nanays and our store owners. This is how you do inventory management. And it's like, no, that's not really the way it works. And so these kinds of things, so that's where it comes from. But to do this, you need really humility to learn and to listen and to co-create. You bring something to the table, your stakeholders bring a lot to the table as well.
How has technology helped your organization grow? And what kind of organization would you have if not for this technology?
So I think things would be a lot messier. I mean, put it this way, things are already very messy.
Okay.
I think one thing you have to accept when you do a startup or when you do an early stage venture, everything is messy all the time. And in fact, when we work with new people, we always tell them like, how comfortable are you with chaos and with unstructured issues?
Not very comfortable.
And I think technology can kind of help you document. It can help you just in terms of how you communicate internally. Slack is basically a professional version of a WhatsApp or Viber, and it just allows you to cut emails internally by 80%. And that's fantastic. But the best tools will never replace behavior. And so you can have the most advanced technology if people are not kind of organized and structured and reliable. Very, very difficult. And so I think one of the things we find is that typically when we work with folks, they're very digitally literate, and it's more around kind of like the communication style that we have to spend more time understanding their communication style or kind of sharing ours with them, because clear, efficient communication is not necessarily the most common skill set.
We now have a lot of use cases for technology. The store owners we're enabling on payments and e-commerce. We're partnered with the different mobile money providers and also enabling the nanay to do more. Bills payment, airtime top-up, selling micro-insurance, even selling higher value products now through their store owner using technology. One limiting factor has always been training, because we've really been doing a lot of this physically on the ground. And I don't think you can ultimately replace everything to the face-to-face and have the same impact, but you could scale certainly with technology. So we've now actually migrated a lot of our training now into the digital platforms. So now you have like a Happy Noi TV on YouTube, but also on Facebook in partnership with the MasterCard Center for Inclusive Growth. We're launching an online course actually on Facebook. And it was quite funny because like we talked to a lot of the nanays, do you know the internet? Hindi po. Ano yung internet? Do you have Facebook? Yes. So the Facebook is internet, right? But that's where we saw, that's where they are. And so like literally now, we now actually have a bunch of our content now on Facebook. Now we have a platform whereby we could reach thousands and tens and thousands and more nanays on a platform if the connectivity is there. You know, our training, we have several trainers on the ground, multiple points, training 25 to 30 nanays, half-day sessions once a month. On digital, you know, that those economics vanish. And of course, there are trade-offs, and we're going to learn through these trade-offs, but certainly quite excited with these platforms on how we can extend our educational programs and training programs to our nanays.
For eHealth Worker, we foresee that having the mobile application would multiply the efforts of the barangay nutrition scholars. Instead of them focusing on writing down, manually computing everything, they could just enter the data, and then they would be able to perform what they need to focus more, which is to provide the feedback to the guardians that their child is malnourished, or that these action items are needed for the child to be healthier. So for us, we think that you multiply yourself through technology, and the effort that you put in can create more change with technology. We also have a web application component that would help decision makers analyze what their current status is, how effective their programs are. So we think that would help further improve the current programs, which is something that isn't done right now. So we can do much more with technology.
Because I work for Accenture, I'll answer your question differently, you know, because we're a technology company, we live and breathe technology, we implement technology for our clients. I guess what I want to talk about is how we use that to encourage students as well as our employees think about technology and how to innovate for clients and for things like social good. We have two programs. One is Program the Future. This is a program that we do with universities every year. We've been doing it for 5 years now, and we always have a social theme, no? And again, this is out of my personal passion to encourage students to think about how do you know, what problems do you see and how do you apply these new technologies to solve these problems. And every year we get so many ideas and students competing. It's very heartening, no? And the inspiration for their ideas are either, you know, from a sick member of the family or a PWD member of the family. They want to just improve the way they entertain themselves, you know, so, or solve a problem in their school or in their community. So in our first year, the winner was from UP Diliman, and they wanted to solve for public schools because they didn't have science labs. So they created an app where kids can do experiments using tablets, no? And so they can mix different chemicals and see the reaction. So it's that type of thing that we want to encourage with students. So that's one thing we're very proud of, Program the Future. For our employees, we have a program called Ideas to Outcome. And again, Tech for Good is a theme there, and Glory talked about one of the ideas. So they won in a global contest. So they won locally, and then they won last year in the Global Technology Innovation Contest, where the subject is the health worker and automating their tasks. So if I reflect on these things, for me, it's not about how high-tech it is. What is the desired social outcome, right? And then you work backwards to see what technology will apply. Because even if I know about all these technologies, if it doesn't apply, if like Mark talked about the nanays who don't even know how to navigate the internet, then even if my solution has virtual reality, it doesn't matter, right? So it has to match the audience and the users to really make a profound impact. So that's what I want to share.
Again, because we work a lot with these stores, and a lot of technology partners have actually sort of like, hey, this solution, and quite ignorantly, honestly, in the beginning, we would just say, okay, let's just deploy it because it makes sense in the 4 walls of the office that we have brainstormed on. And like one of the first things I remember, at that time there were no tablets yet, POS. Like a desktop computer with a barcode scanner that we installed to around 30 stores. And when we visited some of these stores, our field staff noticed that in one computer there's like, pardon this, but like rats living inside because it was unused, right? So it's like, what's this? And then, but we did find two computers that were being used by kids playing games. So again, because it has to go backwards. I mean, what is the technology is a tool and it's a great tool, and obviously we're fans of it. But what is the problem? But how do you make it usable? We still deal with a lot of tech partners. We could do this with sari stores, et cetera, et cetera. And then, but now we've learned enough to sort of like run it through with our nanays first before we actually even deploy it. So we do take that as a very important critical step. But it's powerful. But it has to be appropriate. It has to be done contextually. But once those things click, and once the nanays see the power and it's easy to use, then that's magic. Yeah.
Yeah, and actually, if I can add for just 10 seconds, it's a lot about, I think we face the same issue at Education, where I think at some points we were thinking, oh, we're going to come up with this great recommendation engine, and we're going to tell you all these different things you can study, and it's actually like a little bit overwhelming for the students. And actually, the lower tech solution, which is just informative blogs, informative videos, very simple quizzes, actually that answers 80% of the students' questions. And so if you think about the adoption rate, I think that's also what's important, because I'm also a bit of a tech geek as well, but my 17-year-old typical user is not necessarily going to be at the same end of the spectrum. And so you need to make sure you're building a product for them, not for you. And that's always a challenge, I think.
And that's the challenge for us technologists, right? Like how do you, even though it's so complex underneath, how do you make it simple for the user?
UI UX needs to be very easy to
And
adopt.
we also encountered the same issue with designing our application. So we were fortunate enough to be able to test it with actual users. And initially, their reaction was, it's great because they were able to see how it would benefit them. So it was one point that struck me was that the user should be able to see that how this technology would benefit me. And the other thing was that we had to craft it to meet our target audience needs. So since barangay nutrition scholars generally were older women or older nanays in barangays, their comments were to make the text larger, the fonts clearer, and things like that matter to them. So it should matter to us as the ones who design, the ones who develop, and the ones who create technology for them.
How has technology helped your cause so far?
For eHealth Worker, we foresee that technology will be able to help barangay nutrition scholars to be more productive with their work and effective. So instead of them having to write down, as what I've mentioned, everything, the details of the child each time they visit, which may or may not get collated, they would be able to use the application to log all of the child's information, and most especially the important ones like their weight, their height, to determine if they're malnourished or not. And with that, they would be able to provide the actions that they need to better the child's nutrition. So, and on one hand, decision makers would be able to use the data that nutrition scholars gathered to assess how the child is progressing, how their barangays or how their municipalities are improving, or if they're not improving, what projects have been implemented. And this altogether would result to better decision making, I think, and would help all the stakeholders, the children, the parents, the nutrition scholars, the government even, and us as technology makers to better the living of the children, especially since malnutrition is very crucial in terms of timeline and in terms of the future of the child.
With our store owners, I mean, like for us, technology is really transformational on several levels. For our store owners, it allows them just using a mobile Android phone to really extend into new business opportunities, payments, e-commerce. I had mentioned them also as well. But you can also extend that to their communities because the sari-sari store is extremely critical component of, in Filipino life. And so, like, when you can bring a remittance service to a barangay level through a store, you're also rendering, a good service to the community. So that technology is transformational, especially now if you embed e-commerce into that, and even extending to local micro producers that can then eventually join that platform, and then a lot of big dreams with that. But also for us, because technology allows an organization such as ourselves with limited resources to scale and to reach more.
I actually love the one story you told before we
Yeah.
started this roundtable discussion about how sari stores nowadays can actually sell appliances.
Yeah.
So there was one
Yeah.
sari store that sold a ref, fridge.
Because now the shelf is digital. Before, the confines of space were really like the physical shelf, but like now in a phone, it's the long tail. It's like digital, literally a digital shelf, and so anything you could sell in theory through that phone that could get delivered to that store is now that's your product mix. And so working with microfinance institutions and our store owners, we've enabled a number of them actually to get onto e-commerce. And pabili po ng suka, ng asukal, at ng electric fan. Yeah, it's now possible with technology. And of course, the store doesn't need even to stock this as inventory. Just imagine the Avon catalog or that catalog, but now it's like on the phone. And it just gets delivered after a few days. So this is the possibility. These are just a fraction of the possibilities that you can enable store owners with using technology.
For education.ph.
Yes, so I think for us, it's in a way, if you think about, I think the shelf analogy is fantastic. Think about it if you had a counselor in high school or in college, kind of guiding you through your education or your career choices. In the past, you would need hundreds of magazines and of books to kind of start explaining what all the options are. With Education, actually everything is available for free on your device. So whether you're on a school computer or on an Android or mobile, etc., you can basically see all the education options you have facing you and kind of like all the career advice. So we're able to bridge the information gap massively, and we're able to do it anywhere in the country. So what we love, I think one of the things I geek out on is when I see our traffic, it's really 24/7. Like you have kids at like 2 a.m. checking out career options because it's people now are you don't just think from like 9 to 6. Like you're online all the time. Students are spending 4 or 5 hours online a day, and so you need to be where they are. And so for us, technology has enabled us to kind of be with the students when they need us, not just during like school office hours. I think the second thing that's incredibly powerful as well is we now have a platform that's allowing either schools or corporations to kind of like share educational knowledge with students anywhere in the country, and without having to go through like massive physical campaigns to like go to like the deepest barangay. You can actually push this kind of like helpful content online for the students. And so for us, it's really been about the reach. We couldn't be getting 10 million students a year if it wasn't for the digital aspect.
For us, like I said, it keeps changing. So the challenge and the exciting part about my job is really to keep up with technology, because we want to be able to lead our clients into the future, and we can't lead them there if we're not there. So we're kind of trying to be a step ahead in terms of learning about these new things that are emerging, so that we can think of ideas and how to apply them to business and also to tech for good.
Okay, so Rappler actually conducted a survey mid-October to early November just this year. It was answered by 320 individuals, and out of the 320 people who joined the survey, 76% of this number is already using the simplest, most accessible tech tools, and they're actually open to embracing more advanced forms of tech even further. There are still people who aren't as open to using cloud-based programs, analytics. It's still very foreign to them. So how do you bridge that gap? How do you address the challenges that hinder these people from using more advanced technology?
For us, I can speak to it. It's a lot about customer education. I think where we're quite privileged is because from the website user perspective, we deal a lot with students, right? And so I don't have to convince a 14-year-old or an 18 or 20-year-old about the importance of the internet. I think what's more difficult is, for example, when we work with schools, schools have not been running digitally or online for that long necessarily. And so I think there you need to have that conversation. It needs to be an educational conversation. You can't just come and say like, this technology is going to solve the way students apply to your school, or this is going to solve the way you recruit fresh grads. Like, you have to sit down and explain, okay, kids today are spending 10 times more time online than kids were spending 10 years ago. And so you need to be online because that's where they are, but like, here's how you can engage with them online. But you can never force. It's always a conversation. And also, I think this was mentioned earlier in the conversation, you have to ask them where the reticence is coming from. Because your position can never be, oh, you're wrong, let me just teach it to you and you'll finally understand and see the light. It has to be, okay, let's problem solve. Like, what is the issue? Is it the UI UX? Is it too complex to use? Then if it is, you need to fix your interface and make it simpler. You can't just say, oh, at some point they'll figure it out. No, it has to be a conversation. It has to be co-created, co-produced together.
Here's how not to deploy it with a nanay. Nanay, here is a cell phone. This is you don't talk about the technology. Sometimes you don't even talk about technology. You just say, this is what it will do for you. And then again, if you talk to a store owner, the language is dagdag kita, or how do they earn more? And then it works backward from there. So what is it going to do for you? Then just so happens it's an app. And then it's a phone. It's a mobile smartphone, etc., etc. But what can it do for her initially? And the technology will follow. Then you go into this discussion, it's like, oh, is it usable, etc., etc. But first, it's like, how do you incite even the motivation and desire to use it? So you just talk about, it's, to be honest, like Sales 101, which is what is the benefit? And if that's benefit clicks, then you can talk about, then you just have to learn this, blah, 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 etc., etc. And then there's like, is it usable? Then you have to adjust.
We encountered that when we were pilot testing the first iteration of our application. So we presented our mobile application and then we showed them the preview of what they'll be having. And then what clicked with them was that the benefit that they'll be getting from the application, and that we're improving it to cater to them more. So their interest was because of that, and they were asking, kailan ba kami bibigyan ni Mayor ng mga tablets? They were already excited, even with us. We're saying, it's just prototype. We're just thinking of the ideas for now, but they were already way ahead of us. And we initially were thinking, they might be resistant to the change in the way that this would work. But probably because of the showing of the benefits to them, it made them more open to the idea of the change with the technology.
And I think that's the key, the putting human beings at the center of the design, of anything that we develop, and making it simple to use. Even if the technology behind it is so complex. Like, for instance, you go on the internet, there are recommendations being pushed to you. That requires a lot of sorting through data, analytics, big data, and crawling the internet about personalizing the recommendation. That is complex, but for the consumers, they just see a recommendation, oh, it makes sense. And so I think that's the magic. If we can make it simple and put the human at the center when we design these things, I think that's how we would succeed. And I really believe that companies will thrive in the digital age if they focus on customer experience.
The similar theme here is just simplifying it for the average user. Is that the biggest challenge for you? Or is there another bigger challenge when it comes to addressing the people who are not all that open to advanced technology?
I think infrastructure, we talked about it, is a challenge. I don't think that we will solve it right away, but I've seen and heard enough about it that hopefully the private sector working with the government and with certain agencies in the government will start to move the needle, because we really need infrastructure. I think there was a World Economic Forum where it says internet is a basic human right now. And we can include more people in the digital economy if we can improve the infrastructure in the Philippines. So that's certainly one area I would call out.
Yeah, for us, it's the seamless integration. So I think the big risk when you introduce technology is that if you have very enthusiastic early adopters, they will kind of push for it internally. But then you still have the existing old processes, and so people end up doing twice the work. And so, for example, in some of the schools we work with, we found that someone was championing online application, and so they're great. All the students can use Education to apply online to the school, and so all the kids were applying online, but they didn't necessarily fix the back end, and so the poor people in admissions were receiving online application and had to process them, and then still process them offline as well. And so you weren't really getting the time saving that the technology was meant to bring. And so I think it's about tempering the excitement of the early adopters with making sure that you don't basically create double the work for everyone else behind, because that's when you're going to get massive resistance to technology. If people are saying like, okay, it's just twice the work, I'm not interested in being part of it.
Infrastructure and the simplification, and sometimes you have to go to first principles. I think sometimes it's easy to think that we have a manual physical process now and let's just digitize that. But sometimes you have to go back and what do you really want to do, and then design the technology. A concrete example would really be, a lot of point of sale technology companies have approached us to deploy these in stores, etc. And I don't think that's problem has been solved, because a lot of the nanais are also, so there's that process that you can do it digitally on POS, but the nanais have their own internal system, and so I think it has to be rethought. And I wish I could come up with an example where there's a solution for it, but I think that one you can only solve. You have some ideas around it, but it has to be done not by taking a physical process and digitizing it, or getting a high-tech solution now and trying to force fit it into a small sari-sari store. And so that one needs a rethink, and it's quite an interesting and exciting problem to solve. And we're working with some tech partners who have some interesting ideas around it.
So like what you said, it's not just the technology per se. It has to be the system overview that we should think about to design with the customers in mind. So it's not just that one piece that we're going to digitize, that we're going to revolutionize, but we should think how that fits into everything. So for example, in our case, the reports that the Barangay Nutrition Scholars handle should also be made available using the DOH template. We should also think about that. The impact that this technology change would bring to the ecosystem should also be thought. And it makes it more difficult in a way, because you're introducing something and it might cause additional problems or additional challenges, but it should also still be in the back of our minds when we're designing solutions.
So now I do want to hear what advice you guys have for, people who are advocates of social good, social entrepreneurs who are just starting their business.
Try not to reinvent the wheel. See what's already being done in the Philippines. There's already a lot of great, I think tech platforms. See what's being done abroad, and then try to contextualize it. But there's no need for you to be the new Einstein of this world and coming up with something so complex that no one can understand it. It's very often, if you have an idea, someone else has had it before. And so when we started Education, we made it a point to look at 20 different countries and seeing how other websites had tried to do it in those countries. And that saved us years of development. Learn from other people's mistakes, essentially, and learn from the mistakes that we're making at this table. No, but it is really there's no shortcut for experience, and the only quote-unquote shortcut you can have is look for other people who've tried to do something similar and understand in what ways did they succeed and where did they fail, and that will save you a lot of time.
For me, dovetailing it from the start of the conversation, make sure you're doing it for the right reasons, because it's easy to get into this whole social good thing and say, and honestly, we've worked with a number of these people that are very, very well-meaning, but I'm going to help these people, and these people are going to love me. And then they live for that kind of virtuous sort of motivation. I don't think that's the right motivation. And again, I'm not, in a way, I am critiquing, but I'm just saying it has to go through a deeper, Henry wants to solve a problem, right? So it's very clear to him. I mean, Ambe was talking about seeing this, the post office, which was the genesis. Obviously, Gloria was talking about her passion for the health workers. And so it has to come from that really come from a good place and go from the right intentionality. Because if you get that wrong, you are going to be very frustrated. This is not a kumbaya world, a social good world. It is not, we do good and everything is great and fantastic. No, it's very challenging. In fact, one could argue it's even more challenging than corporate or tech, purely, because you have that layer of social, right? And so you have to go into it for the right reasons. And on the practical side, dovetailing to what Henry was saying, you have to look at what's been done, but also look specifically what is your role? Because good social entrepreneurs sometimes have this like messianic complex, to be honest, that we will solve everything and we can do everything, and that's not really the truth. So you have to be very clear, what is your role and what can you uniquely bring? So for us, we'll just work with partners. The technology side, we'll work with partners. Some we need to build, ecosystem, microfinance partners, etc. So we focus now on the nanay, which is a prime stakeholder. So how can we take that lens from them? And that's our role, to train and to link up with partners and to organize this network. And if people come up with solutions through this network, we'll work with them. But at least it's quite clear for us what is our role. And we know that we cannot do everything. And so it's kind of hard when you're starting to sometimes understand what that role is. So sometimes you have to go through multiple roles and figure out where can you best spend your energy and where can you partner. And that's a lesson we've learned through the years. But I guess it was easy because from the very beginning, we knew that we couldn't do everything. And so we had to be very focused. What can we particularly bring to the table?
It really starts with what is the desired social outcome, and then working back and figuring out what technology will apply. It's not the other way around. And then the second thing is really, as guys are very inspiring, and for us, we want to continue to work with the ecosystem. I don't think it's one player. In order to affect a long-term change, it needs to be a partnership. And so as social entrepreneurs, I think they have to be good communicators and really connect the dots, no, of the ecosystem and work those relationships, because it matters at the end of the day in terms of the outcome that we want to achieve.
For me, the first part of our journey was that we had to think differently. We have our surroundings. We don't need to go to the provinces to find problems. We can find the problems in our own environment, in our own homes, in our own barangays. So the improvements should start from what you are seeing currently, and maybe things that you're not seeing within your own surroundings. And so that's what we first were able to see. And the next one is consult and ask for help. So in my case, I'm not actually a mobile developer, but with the help of Accenture and the specializations that we have, we were able to bring about that application because we had the needed help and the experts to help us. So you don't have to do it all alone by yourself. You can ask help from anyone else.
Thank you so much for joining me here today. I love that everyone has chosen a particular battle to fight, and it's fighting those battles that is actually creating social good. My name is Cheska Litton-Calao, and thank you for joining us in this roundtable discussion.
What if you could capture the new? New ideas and technologies and business models? Would that be enough? What if you could apply the ideas and innovations now? Would that take you further? This is the opportunity to harness the possibilities that spring from disruption and transform your business now. New applied now. 3 simple words behind one singular idea. A promise to work together to take the new and apply it for impact now, in every industry, every country, every day. Accenture. New applied now.